Okay, so what happens? Well, the process of decolonization begins, formalized by a General Assembly resolution in 1960, and suddenly the United Nations changes from being a rather comfortable small group of colonial powers to having a developing world majority in the organization. Now, at that point, developing states were very pro-human rights. They saw human rights as essentially about two things: ending racism and racial discrimination, and secondly, about development, about trying to rejig the world system to give economic support to newly independent countries. They were in favor of human rights, and we see in the 1960s the UN changing its system basically, with treaty committees to monitor compliance, new treaties, the beginning really of a long pattern, not yet finished, of doing human rights treaties, declarations, statements on various human rights issues, the disappeared, migrant workers, stuff on indigenous peoples. The list keeps going on, and we have finally gotten on to that list at least twice. maybe we have found a home within the UN system. What happened in the 1960s was the expansion of a part of the UN that we can call the expert system, with the treaty committees and individual human rights experts, or special rapporteurs, using the French term, which the old diplomatic conventions required be used to some extent within the United Nations system. And we saw, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the UN sort of saying, oh, wow, this is a chance to redefine our role, expand our mandates, and you get a series in the 1990s of international world conferences run by the UN on environment, on population, on various things, including on human rights in Vienna in 1993. Boom, wow. We had a situation in which now the Soviet Union, which had been competitive with the West, has been reduced in power, and we get the creation of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ooh, this means that the bureaucracy, a simple bureaucratic or body within the UN system, now gets the status of being a high commission. And so it becomes not simply the servant of the member states, but it becomes an independent or recognized expert body. Okay, so we start to make some progress within these expert bodies. When I spoke in 1992 as a flaming faggot, as an ALGA activist in the subcommission, this was in what was labeled as the expert body, which had some experts and some non-experts as members. And at that point, a write-up on the session that year regarded open hostility by certain members of the subcommission to my having raised homosexual issues. This was only, as far as we can figure out, only the second time this had happened in terms of official UN meetings. Okay. In 1994, the expert system, that is the treaty body set up to monitor compliance with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, decides the case of Tunin versus Australia, dealing with the old British Empire anti-sodomy laws, and rules in our favor. Boom! Not simply on privacy, which is a kind of mushy basis, but on the right of equality. And this really becomes the beginning of something concrete within the UN human rights system, recognizing LG at that point. T was still on the horizon. we get a few things happening. We get the Beijing World Conference on Women in 1995. 11 lesbian and gay organizations get accredited to speak at the meeting. And that was a tremendous breakthrough. And not all of them had ongoing accreditation. Okay. Extrajudicial executions. The Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Executions spoke about murders of gay, lesbians, and trans, and was reprimanded for doing that. And we had a series of fights at the UN to try to shut her up, which eventually failed. I can't go into detail on it. Brazil moved a resolution at a certain point in 2003 to 2005 to try to get lesbian and gay issues and trans issues on the human rights agenda of the United Nations, and that failed. Other Latin American countries were not prepared to pick up the ball at that point, and Europe said, we can't pick up the ball on this because we don't want to emphasize this as a purely Western issue. What has happened in the period since the failed Brazil resolution was that Latin America has shifted. It has come on side. So now in terms of LGBTI issues at the United Nations, we have the support of the expert parts of the system, and we have a voting bloc which consists of Europe, so-called Western Europe, another grouping which includes US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They can be counted on, and Latin America is with us solidly. So that's really great, except for the Caribbean, which is linked to the Latin American region. Those two blocks of votes, plus a few scattered others, oh, maybe Japan, maybe Thailand, maybe Philippines, and some crucial abstentions. So beloved India now abstains. And China, what does China do? China used to vote with the developing countries all the time, and so it was usually a no. China now abstains. So with crucial abstentions, and people not showing up to vote, which happens more with the developing states than with the developed states, and with the bloc of European and Latin American states, plus South Africa, we have now had 2 solid votes, not huge majorities, but 2 solid votes in the Human Rights Council, which have confirmed that lesbian and gay, transgender, intersex issues are part of the ongoing human rights work of the United Nations system, and it has authorized 2 reports which have been done by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So we're still at the very much the beginning. We don't have much in the way of process, but we found a home in Geneva.
Thank you, Professor Sanders. So next I'd like to call on Arvind Narrain, who is in the Geneva Director of ARC International, which works on international advocacy for LGBT rights. He is also a founding member of the Alternate Law Forum in Bangalore, India, a collective of lawyers who work on critical practice of law. He has worked on human rights issues including mass crimes, communal conflict, LGBT rights, and human rights history, including the fight against criminalization of homosexuality, homosexual conduct in India over the last 17 years. So now we will have presentations.
Thank you. What I want to do is take off where Douglas left off, put Douglas's presentation within some kind of a framework, so you get a clear sense of what exactly has happened at the UN level. I'm also going to try and raise issues. Before, one small point I want to make, I also want to acknowledge friends of Andre, who's at the back, who's done a lot of work on the UN human rights system. So any questions you ask me can equally well be asked to Andre. You can answer it very well as well. So what is that point? And to get to the presentation I want to, the points I want to highlight, Douglas is right. We started in 1994 with Tunen, And I take it one step further. We get 2015 in terms of resolution protect the families. There are a range of things which happen in between. The fundamental shifts I want to highlight is when you're referring to Tunen versus Australia, which Douglas has referred to, you're referring to a gay man. You're referring to the question of sexual orientation. ILGA has moved away to say sexual orientation, gender identity, intersex. When did the UN move? Has the UN moved at all? That's a question that I'm asking. And that's in 1994. 2003, we see there's really not much shift in terms of this thinking on who is the marginalized group or community. Because in 2003, when Brazil moves the draft resolution, it's on grounds of violence and discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation. We get 2011, which is the first UN resolution on SOGI. That uses the language, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So in a sense, you see how the UN system responds to the demand for inclusivity raised at the grassroots level. And in this case, my own thinking is that I think the only reason why gender identity came on board is because it was raised by groups in the global south. Groups in Asia, where gender identity is a very, very important issue. Groups from around in the Latin American context, where once again it's an important issue. I don't think the Europeans had a sense that gender identity mattered. It came in the strongest possible way from countries in the global south, where their traditional identities were discriminated and marginalized on grounds of their gender identity. And so, in a sense, the first UN resolution on SOGI really followed the Yogyakarta principles, which got the concept of gender identity and sexual orientation. The first resolution, again, Douglas has highlighted it very well. It was a small majority, and the states from Asia, which have been consistent of beginning supporters, were at that point in time were Korea, were Japan, and were Thailand. These are three states which were supportive of the resolution at the moment in time. And I'm sorry, I'm jumping a little bit. I want to get back a little bit to the Brazil resolution, 2003. I refer to one notion of the sexual orientation shift to gender identity. I want to refer to some other notions. In terms of the Brazil resolution was also very important in laying in place the fundamental obstacles which we would face at the UN level. When the Brazil resolution was initially mooted, the opposition came on three grounds. The Pakistani delegate, for example, I think exemplified it best. His argument was simple. He said the resolution is an insult to 1.2 billion Muslims. He said we find it problematic on grounds of religion. We cannot support a resolution such as this. The second argument he made, he said, this seems to be a Western agenda. It doesn't really matter to countries in the global south. What matters to countries in the global south are issues such as poverty, issues such as access to clean drinking water, and the West doesn't care about any of these issues. He gave a concrete illustration. He said the Human Rights Commission at that moment in time had a resolution saying poverty is a violation of human rights. And he said France came in, moved an amendment saying extreme poverty is a violation of human rights. And he said, is that what you guys think as well? Was the challenge he posed. The third challenge he said, you know, as far as we're concerned, LGBTI people don't exist in our societies. They don't exist. Where are they? They're not there. You might be here, you might be from the West, you might be Western educated, but it doesn't really exist. That was his point, right? And his objections seem to have a resonance with Brazil, who said that in the interest of friendly relationships with other nations, we're not going ahead with this resolution. And so the resolution got stalled in 2003. In 2011, as Douglas said, South Africa, we got on board a range of new allies. Latin American countries came on board very strongly. South Africa, of course, sponsored the resolution. And the resolution, in this case, passed. I want to just show you a little bit of the voting so you get a sense of... yeah. Yeah. If you look at the for in that context, as far as Asia is concerned, it's Japan, Korea, Thailand. Look at the against. It's Bahrain, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Maldives, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. Look at the abstentions. Douglas pointed out very well. It's China, right? That's in 2011. Then we get to 2014. 2014, the resolution is in a sense a follow-up resolution all it does is it asks the High Commissioner to update the previous report on good practices and ways to overcome violence and discrimination. And look at the voting on this. Again, from the Asian context, Japan, Philippines, Korea, Vietnam. So Philippines and Vietnam come on board, and I think Jonas is going to talk a little bit about how did Philippines really come on board and how did this notion of LGBT people don't exist in Asia get, in a sense, challenged. Post the resolution, the resolution of course authorized the study to look at the issues of violence and discrimination against LGBTI people. And what did the study do? I just want to highlight a couple of points about the study, and maybe we'll take it in the discussion after that. In a sense, looking at it from a local or a domestic context, resolutions don't provide much meat as it were, right? If you're going to cite it in a judicial proceeding, the resolution has two words. It says sexual orientation, it says gender identity, it says discrimination, it says violence. That's really it. There's nothing much else underlying that, you know? There's nothing to explain concepts and notions which judges and judicial authorities can understand. Which is why this study is a very, very important thing. And I urge you to look at the studies authored by the High Commissioner, which are very useful in terms of a litigation strategy, for example. In the Indian context, we cited the study before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, of course, threw it out, said that we're not interested in this particular study. But the point is, it could have very well been interested. So if you're thinking of some kind of advocacy, I would suggest get to the study. Look at the study more closely, see how we can utilize it in your local and your domestic context. I just want to make one last point about the study. We said LGBTI, we keep saying LGBTI, but where is the I, as far as all of us are concerned? It doesn't really exist, it's just a LGBTI, we just say it like that. But the study, for the first time, acknowledges the importance of the violation or the bodily mutilations committed on intersex infants. And that's an important conceptual advance as well, you know. So I think the study has a way of educating us really on a range of issues. I think I make 3 points on this. First is the study makes it very clear that violence and discrimination as far as the LGBTI community is not only about the public state, it's also about the private home. That is, LGBTI people face violence from the family. And that's an important advance in thinking, because the family, as we know, is a fundamental group unit of society. And here, the study is challenging that in some ways, saying, you know, that might be so at one level, but at another level, the family is responsible for violence against LGBTI persons. The study also refers to the entire question of the medical establishment and the kinds of violence inflicted through the medical establishment, both in terms of classification of homosexuality as a disorder, as well as in terms of the violence inflicted on intersex infants. So I think there are many reasons why the study should be read, not just as a way of something we can use, but also something which can educate us on the diversity and range of violations which are actually happening in the world today. And I think I'll end with the last couple of points in terms of the challenges. Time up? 1 minute? Okay, perfect. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to speak about the family resolution, but I think that's not going to happen. So I'll just end with this. So if you want to ask, what are the challenges in time going forward? I'll make the following points. I think we still struggle with the question of establishing the fact that LGBTI people exist in the global south. I'll say this for this reason. Assuming, for example, the UPR of Qatar is coming up, there's no person from Qatar speaking up on the entire issue. Qatar is well justified in saying, you know, it doesn't exist in our culture. And I was just listening to the previous session to wonderful narratives from Bangladesh and Pakistan. And the Bangladeshi narrative, the Bangladesh person can very well say LGBTI people don't exist, because we haven't got the Bangladesh narrative from the local level to manifest itself at the international level. So that existence, though we all know LGBTI people exist in the global south, something which government should know in a way they can't question. And that hasn't happened fully as yet. The second point, again, links up to the previous panel, which is the notion that religion is uniformly homophobic. When the Pakistani delegate says that their sexual orientation and gender identity is an insult of 1.2 billion Muslims, surely we should be able to question that by saying that, we don't agree with the interpretation of the Muslim. That has to happen in a much more forceful and stronger way. Thirdly, of course, is the entire notion of blocks. The OIC is about a certain kind of larger than life status, but is the OIC as a bloc permeable? Are there countries in the OIC which might not think quite, like say Pakistan, Egypt, and Pakistan and Egypt think, right? Could it be Albania, could it be other countries, Tunisia, which think differently? And are the ways in which we can begin that debate and dialogue within the OIC itself is a challenging question. And maybe the last point I'd make is that, it's a response to the Pakistani delegate again, is that you have to demonstrate the fact that your concerns are as much over the entire issue of child rights, civil liberties, gender rights, and that you're very concerned about the entire issue of socio-economic rights as well. And that's the way very often struggle in the global south takes place. Again, a simple point on that is I think in difficult contexts, it's very important to link up to other social movements. And that's what I think many courageous and brave groups around the global south have done. And we need to draw from these experiences and those examples and put it out there and say, well, LGBTI people are concerned. They are concerned with a range of human rights issues because it matters to them. They're not just purely LGBTI people. They're also citizens of their own societies and their cultures. They live in their bodies and their cultures. And all these issues matter to them. And you can't divorce them from a range of other social concerns which matter to them as well. I'll end with that.
Thank you so much, Arvind. So now we move on to the country context. So I'd like to invite Rajiv from Bangladesh. So Rajiv has been working with Voice of Bangladesh, BOB, the oldest platform of self-identified Bangladeshi gay men for the past 12 years. Under his leadership, BOB took part in a universal periodic review both in 2009 and 2013. Rajiv has also been involved with various UN advocacy initiatives of ILGA, ARC International, and UPR Forum in Bangladesh. So welcome.
I will pick up right exactly where Arvind actually stopped. The Bangladesh government recognizing the LGBTI community, does it recognize or not? Does these mechanisms help us to gain that acknowledgement, that recognition, and whether it has been helpful for us or not? So this is not working. I will probably just speak from here. I can, I will take it from here. Thank you. So I'll stand here and I will work on this. Okay. So universal periodic rhetoric or universal periodic review. That's one thing. So I believe that many of you have worked on UPR, many of you have heard of UPR, and many of you probably have want to work on UPR. So from our experience and the conversation that we've been having in our activist forum, this has been popularized by Indonesia, the universal periodic rhetoric. So I'm going to go into our experience. Just going to introduce that I work with Voice of Bangladesh, as you can see our logo. And just to put you in the context, we participated in UPR in 2009 and 2013. Two reviews were conducted for Bangladesh. As it happens with UPR, you know that there are reports submitted. And then there are state reports, NGO reports, state-based, non-state actors report. In 2009, what we did is that we submitted a report in partnership with Sexual Rights Initiative, SRI. And based on that report, there were two specific recommendations to decriminalize homosexuality. Czech Republic said to repeal Section 377, which is very similar to what you have in other countries which were colonized by the British. Also, there was Czech Republic, which also asked to decriminalize same-sex activity. So these were two very direct recommendations to the government. There was another recommendation by Czech Republic to provide training to law enforcers to protect the rights of LGBTI persons. The ones in red were, of course, rejected by the government right away. The ones in green, it was accepted. And we were like, wow, the government is so progressive. And it accepted a recommendation to train up law enforcers on sexual orientation and gender identity. We were like, that's amazing, that's great. But when they were asked why they rejected those two recommendations, the government said the following, that Bangladesh is a country of strong and traditional religious values, and there were no concerns raised from any part of the society, hence the recommendations were out of context. So, which actually meant that they denied the existence of LGBTI community in Bangladesh. And they said, we did not exist, we were not there were no concerns, it's a happy, big family, Muslim, yes. So, yeah. Of course, so what we tried to do is that in 2013 we knew that 4 years later there will be another review, so we wanted to change that situation. So from 2009 and 13 we did a lot of work. We teamed up with various organizations. We became member of this forum called Human Rights Forum of Bangladesh. It's a forum of 19 leading organizations working on human rights. So this was actually, we would say, one of the very huge achievements for the movement itself. The cross movement that Arvind was talking about, having partnership with different organizations, different movements. So we were able to be a part of that Human Rights Forum, which means that they were actually endorsing and supporting our cause. And these included organizations which are very, very popular in Bangladesh. And one of them endorsing this issue means a lot. So we actually are now part of the larger human rights movement in the country. So this was great. We did a lot of documentation. So this also enriched our expertise, our skills, our resources, and our the reports as well. We produced multiple reports for ourselves, for our partner organizations. Wherever we went, people asked us, so what do you guys face? What happens to you when you're LGBT? So we had to produce reports for various organizations to work with. We did a lot of independent lobbying with diplomatic missions. We went to UK, US, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, a lot of diplomatic missions and had meetings with them. And we also lobbied with National Human Rights Commission. And by the way, when we say we, it does not only mean my organization, Body of Bangladesh, it means the forum that I'm talking about. It also means Bandhu Social Welfare Society, which was there. It also means individuals and other organizations which are working in this field. So it's actually a very collaborative process that we followed through for this 4 years, long 4 years. So the result that we got in 2013 was not that happy, but not that bad either. We got, for 2013 we submitted 3 reports, one with the forum, another again with SRI, and with this Dutch organization called GHRD. And this was also the first time when the Human Rights Commission, the National Human Rights Commission, mentioned SOGI in its report. There were 2 advance questions from UK and the Netherlands. There was a comment from USA during the interactive dialogue. There was one specific recommendation from Chile to decriminalize again. So we are very happy with the outcome. And when the government wanted to respond to the US question during the interactive dialogue, the government said very specifically this. They said, on LGBT, we concur with NHRC on law of land. However, we recognize the need for protecting more vulnerable groups for our population, given the constitutional rights and freedom. Moreover, we do not condone any discrimination or violence against any human being on any pretext. We thought this was really well structured. It talked about constitutional rights. It talked about freedom. It talked about the law of the land. And for the first time ever, the government uttered the word LGBT. We thought from 2009, when they said we do not exist, to 2013 when they categorically accepted our existence and said that they did not condone violence and discrimination on any ground. We thought that was progress, that was positive. So, but of course, this was, you have to understand that UPR, the whole system is a big show off for the government. It's all good things. So it has no meaning, of course, in the grassroots level. We did not see any changes afterwards whenever we wanted to speak with the government. I don't think they ever uttered the word LGBT in Bangladesh again. So, yeah. So, you know, I was told to talk about how effective UPR has been for our work and how it can be made more effective. You know, from our experiences, when we thought about UPR, these were some of the negative sides that we thought came about. That this is actually a non-binding process. It does not require the government to fulfill the pledges it makes at the UN. So you have to understand that. And it's a very state-driven process where, you know, the state has its friends, and the friends only talk good things about the friends. So in most of the states will, you know, just appreciate the government for 2 or 3 minutes, talk about the good things, and be done with it. So that we have to, and it's time and resource consuming. Given that we are a non-registered, non-funded, informal organization, we couldn't have done that if we were not doing it collaboratively with other organizations. Of course, the low outcome compared to the effort. And it requires a lot of coordination, both nationally and internationally. We thought were like, you know, a little daunting. And the bureaucratic process, the skills that you need, all the reports, the documentation, and to understand the whole UN maze, the mechanism, it requires a lot of time and effort. And of course, there's also been the fear of reprisals. When we go to the UN, when we go to all these places, we actually out ourselves. You know, we expose ourselves. So while in the country, we probably would not do that, but in international forums, we do that. I remember that after the UPR review, our foreign minister sent us very nice cards written that the foreign minister, you know, requests the pleasure of your presence in a dinner in a meeting, and I was like, should I go or should I not go? You know, so there were kind of things that you have to consider. And coming back to the country, it also puts a lot of media coverage because the UPR is very well attended by the media and everything else. So these are some of the negatives. But the positives, there are lots of positives. As I say that UPR is a process-oriented mechanism, and I for myself, believe in the process rather than the result. So what we have been able to gain through UPR is the systematic documentation. Now we have papers, lots of papers that talks about the LGBT community and the rights violations. The consultation process actually helped us get in touch with other organizations. And it's not only just other organizations, also with the states, with the government. So there was the government, invites the civil society to engage with them. The accountability, you can hold the government accountable that you have stated this, now follow up, with your promises. So, and the media coverage, the networking, the greater mobilization, a lot of good things are in the process. But this is, as I said, 4 years, a lot of effort that is needed. If you're willing to do that, that's amazing, that's great, and it actually can prove to be very effective. And also another positive thing is, of course, you get to go to Geneva, you get to try all their awesome cheese and everything, so that's a good thing. Our take from this experience of being involved with UPR is that we have to, remember that it's a process-oriented mechanism, so we cannot really expect a lot of outcome. The second is that we have to be constantly involved. The midterm reporting, the follow-up of the recommendations, what's happening within the UN, outside the UN, in the government, within the government bureaucracy, and everything. So that requires a full attention to the UN system. So we think the follow-up actually can bring a lot of changes if you engage. And UPR can be more effective if you're also engaged with other mechanisms like the treaty bodies, the conventions, and the special rapporteurs, the special procedures. For example, after UPR, we got involved with ICCPR and CEDAW. We were not working with those mechanisms before. But now we also are part of those as well. And of course, it gave us more visibility, networking, and advocacy tools. So it's really great if we can utilize it, but it's up to us to understand how it will affect our movement, ourselves at home, and how we can contextualize it. So as Arvind was talking about the OIC, Bangladesh voting against all the resolutions and everything, it actually really depends whether we want to pursue this and or not. So it is really for us to have that reflection within our organizational capacity and within our movement, whether we want that or not. UN itself has become very messy. It has become very controversial. A lot of people do not find faith at the UN system anymore. So before we, put our resources into UPR, we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions. And that's where I will leave you. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Rajiv. So lastly, but not least, I'd like to invite Jonas Bagas, who is an Manila-based LGBT rights activist and HIV advocate. He's involved with so many different organizations, but just to highlight, he became involved in kind of like the LGBT policy advocacy network in 1998, and that initiated the push for an anti-discrimination bill in the country. He was and still is affiliated to different organizations such as LGBT and Narrain, which is a network of Filipino, middle-sex and transgender groups. He was part of the civil society delegation that lobbied the members of the UN Human Rights Council to approve the recent Sochi resolution. And he's currently a program associate at eChange Foundation. Welcome, Jonas.
Good afternoon. What I'm going to present this afternoon is an organized reflection of our engagement at the UN Human Rights Council last year. And I was invited to be part of the delegation by ARC. And the context is that there was a pending resolution at the council, and we needed to lobby the Philippines, who's quite notorious for abstaining on Sochi-related resolutions. At worst, sometimes it would actually support resolutions that are quite conservative and go against the interests of the LGBT community. Except, of course, last year when finally the Philippines voted in favor of a resolution, an extension of the 2011 resolution, expressing great concern on Sochi-related violence and discrimination and directing the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to look into these matters and propose recommendations. Not only that, the mission even made a statement to say that the Philippines stand against cases of discrimination and violence against LGBTs and emphasize that the resolution is not creating any new rights for LGBTs, that it's merely directing the UN Human Rights, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to look into, sorry, I don't know what happened. To look into these cases. So it was a drastic change from the pattern of voting and actions made by the Philippine government within the UN Human Rights Council. And even in New York, for example, we'd hardly get action coming from the Philippine government or coming from the Philippine mission to support Sochi-related resolutions or to support Sochi-related questions. So what happened? The initial stand of the mission was actually to abstain again, and that's the information we got from the mission itself, from the mission in New York, from the Home Office. But there was intense lobbying coming from community organizations, and we didn't start from scratch. We actually used existing engagements with different government institutions to lobby the decision makers in Geneva. So for instance, organizations that are working with the Department of Social Welfare and Development lobbied the agency to make sure that an office there or a bureau there would write the mission in Geneva. Same with the National Youth Commission, the Commission on Human Rights, etc. And the good thing is that our government allies actually delivered. The difference in strategy this time was that actually previously would organize letter writing campaigns, even public statements, to encourage the government to support the resolution. Last year, we did it surreptitiously. I remember there was even a question about making a public campaign about it, and we decided against it. Because we know that the Catholic Church is more organized than us. They're deeply embedded within the government, and we definitely lose if there's a public campaign in favor of the resolution. I have to mention these national agencies. So the Philippine Commission on Women, Population Commission, Department of Social Welfare and Development, the Commission on Human Rights, National Youth Commission. These are agencies that are starting to be involved in SOGI-related cases. So they've started to develop certain policies on SOGI, internal administrative policies about SOGI. Some of them are also active on reproductive health. And they're also the same agencies that we actually tap when we have questions related to HIV. So in a sense, we've built relationships with allies within these agencies. There are also other government officials who don't want to come out publicly that they support. And in a sense, they're actually more influential because these are already known allies. But these individuals, some of them actually work at the office of the president. They just did things silently and wrote letters to urge the mission to support the resolution. The other context is that the head of the mission was recently appointed. So she's new, she's open to the agenda. There were also more personal relationships with those who are, or personal ties with those who are in the mission. So for example, the Consul General used to work closely with different women's organizations. So there were pathways to communicate to him and engage him. And the night before the vote, the mission already said privately that they've recommended a yes vote on the resolution, but they're waiting for approval coming from the Home Office. Unfortunately, the president was in New York at that time, and he was with the head of the Foreign Affairs Department, who was supposed to approve the recommendation, and they were in transit to Manila. And so there was another level of lobbying with other government officials in a way to bypass the usual protocols and urge the mission or accept the recommendation of the mission to vote in favor of the resolution. Lastly, the anti-SOGI groups were caught unaware. They didn't know, I think, that this was happening, and therefore they weren't able to lobby and mobilize against the resolution. So, and I'm referring specifically to Catholic organizations. So, some reflections. One reason why the Philippines normally abstain on these issues is that they would say that we don't have any national policy on SOGI. So a national policy is helpful, but I don't think it's a dead end. And it hasn't really prevented the Philippines from making decisions on other issues in the past. For example, on climate change. There are other economic issues where the national government has no clear stand, and yet the nations would make a decision. So it's not a dead end. Second, understanding the pulse of the situation, the lay of the land, is also equally important. For example, we were actually thinking that the main barrier was the influence of the Catholic Church, but when we were talking already to the mission, they were saying it's actually about them getting the support of OIC states whenever we have problems with our overseas Filipinos. Say if there's a crisis in one country and we need ships, we need passage, we need to organize evacuation, then they need the support of OIC countries. After the vote, the mission head told me that she's quite happy about the decision, but she also said that this would have its cost because they would find it hard to ask for support coming from OIC countries, OIC states, for to support the government whenever a crisis arises. The lack of coherence in Philippine politics is a blessing and a curse. A curse, of course, because if you have a clear policy, then you know how to engage. The rules of the game are clear. But at the same time, since it's unclear, your allies within the government would find spaces to make such positions and make policy pronouncements, even though it's unsure whether that such positions would be sustainable, because there's no clear basis for it. So I guess it's more strategic in the long run to have a clear policy to guide the decisions of the mission. But as it stands right now, it's also an opportunity to weave your way into the system and find support. Lastly, I think it's important to define where this engagement is located within your own strategy at the country level. And if you ask me right now if this helped us in promoting for LGBT rights in the Philippines, I'd say no. It made no clear impact in lobbying for the anti-discrimination bill, for example, or in convincing government agencies to develop programs for LGBTs. That said, I'm not saying that the effort is for naught. Actually, I think the question is, we weren't able to define where it's located within our own strategy. I guess we could have maximized this opportunity to carve political spaces within the government, gain more allies in Congress, or to push for the anti-discrimination bill. Still, in front of other countries, the Philippines committed that it's against violence and discrimination against LGBT. And at the end of the day, it's a commitment and the government should deliver.